Before we get started, thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Click on the link in the description of this video to try out Skillshare Premium for 2 months free. Oh, went past it. All right. Man, it has been a while since we've filmed in here. Been doing a lot of man shit Mondays in the other room across the hall. Also, we got the window open today, so it's a different look than even when we normally do videos in here. We're going totally different today. We're going off the cuff. But today we're gonna take a look at something pretty popular on YouTube right now, B-roll. You probably hear people talk about B-roll till you're B-roll blue in the face. But it's a popular subject and it's something I get a lot of questions on, so I figured we'd take a little while today to cover that. If you don't know what B-roll is, which I assume most of you probably do, but if you don't know what it is supplementary footage on top of your main footage or your A-roll. They don't really use the term A-roll much anymore, but your main footage. This, me talking to the camera, this is my A-roll, and B-roll would be any footage I overlay on top of this to kind of emphasize a point or to show something in more detail. A lot of time in vlogs, they use these cinematic sequences to advance the story to the next part of the vlog or whatnot. A lot of times the way I use B-roll is when I'm doing product videos or reviews, I will use overlaid B-roll to show details of the product that I'm talking about. Today, we're gonna be talking about 10 tips for me on how to get that B-roll as crispy as possible. Tip number 1 for getting that sweet, sweet, crispy B-roll: lighting. And I know you guys are like, Jesus, Jeremy, you always talk about lighting, and I do harp on lighting, but that's because lighting is so important. If your shot is lit well, it color grades much easier. If it's not lit well, you've got noise in the image you've got to contest with, so you got to denoise it, and that's going to take longer in editing, which is going to be frustrating. Your color grading's muddy, and it doesn't take color grade as good. Lighting can also add interest and dimension to an object or a person that you're shooting. You can kind of contour someone's face, or you can contour a product to kind of accentuate some of the features. Also, to add interest and dimension to your objects and your shots. I always have my light at about 45 degrees because I prefer a little bit of contouring, a little bit of shadows on the face and some contouring, because I think it just makes for a more interesting shot. If you're in a studio environment where you can control the lighting, I've talked enough about the Aperture 120D, you know all about that great diffused light source. But if you're on a budget, move it by the window. Window light is really, really gorgeous light. It looks really good on pretty much anything. If you're shooting outside, don't shoot mid-noon. That's not a good situation. Noon, very bright, very harsh light, makes everybody look like crap. You're gonna wanna diffuse that light. If you have to shoot in the middle of the day, maybe shoot somewhere that's shadowed or not in the direct sunlight. And obviously, shooting at golden hour, which is that beautiful part of the day where the sun is low in the sky and everything has that nice, warm orange glow, is always awesome. If you can shoot at golden hour, absolutely do that. Everything looks better in golden hour. Angles. The next thing we're gonna talk about is angles. You don't want to get stuck in the rut of shooting everything straight on, standing up and filming at your eye level. That shit gets really boring. Get down low with things, shoot things from up high, shoot them from the side, shoot them from all different ways. Different objects look better from different angles. Kind of like light, you can show dimension by shooting at a 45 degree and maybe showing some features that you can't see from straight on, giving it some depth. People are the same way. A lot of times people have kind of one good side or maybe one side that's not so good. You can change the emotion of a shot based on the angle. A hero shot where you're angled up slightly at the person, it makes them seem kind of bigger and grander. You can shoot from the top down on a person, making them seem kind of smaller and more lonely and kind of separated. Point is, don't be afraid to move around. Don't shoot straight on all the time. Get some different angles and see what looks best. Next tip, and this is one that I didn't really do for a long time, but since I have been doing it, my life is way better. Plan. Your future self will thank you when you're sitting in front of that computer editing. Plan, plan, and more plan. And then plan some more. Couldn't have said it better myself. Actually, I guess I did kind of say it myself, so there's that. Planning is super important. If you're doing product work and you're shooting products, maybe there's certain features you really are going over in your video. You want to make sure you get those shots. If you're doing the fancy whip pan transitions and stuff like that, you need to plan that out, because if you're whipping to the right out of one scene and you want to whip into the next, you need to make sure you're coming from the right direction, or when you get into post, you're not going to have a very good day. You're going to get mad and want to break shit. I've done it before, trust me. You're shooting in golden hour, so you've only got like an hour to shoot. You need to have that planned out, so that way it goes as fluid as possible and you can get in as many shots as you can in that brief window of time. You also may not always be able to reshoot. Maybe you've got a one-time thing you're shooting. Having a plan in place to make sure you get those important shots if you only got one time to get the shot really, really helps out a lot. And lastly, it just saves time and space on your hard drive. I mean, let's be honest, if you go out and you don't have a plan and you don't know what the hell you're shooting and you're just recording everything, eating up 256 gigs on your memory card and wasting 2 hours shooting crap you're never gonna use, do yourself a favor, plan everything out before you go shoot. It's really gonna save you a lot of headaches in the long run. I promise. Next, we got Be Smooth. Now, when I say be smooth, I don't mean like suave or have good pickup lines. I mean, get good smooth footage. Smooth footage looks more professional, it looks better. Not all footage has to be smooth. I completely understand that there is a place for the shaky kind of cam situation, shots where you want that kind of feeling. But in general, smooth shots look better, they look more professional. There's a couple ways you can achieve that. More expensive route is gimbal, something like such. I really like for big cameras this DJI Ronn S. Another one of my favorite things I use, and just about every time I shoot, especially product shots, Rhino gear. They make a slider that has a head that pivots and slides, all motorized, so you can get some really cool, like kind of rotating shots and whatnot. Get some super, super smooth footage. You can also use like a tripod or a fluid head and slowly pan left or right. There are some budget ways you can try to achieve this. There's kind of a little technique where you put a camera on a towel and pull it across a smooth surface. You can get kind of like a smooth sliding shot. Get on a skateboard, or you could get on a bike. You can get manual sliders. You can find those on Amazon for pretty inexpensive. And while you can stabilize footage in post-production using like warp stabilizer or something like that, I do suggest using it, because sometimes if you just have a tiny little bit of jitter, you can slap that on there and it just looks dead smooth and it looks really, really good. But if you've got some pretty shaky, rough footage, a lot of times the stabilizers just make things look all warped and weird and it just looks really amateur and crappy. Another good trick is filming stuff in slow motion. If you film stuff in 120 frames a second, it's gonna really smooth out a lot of those bumps and bobbles and stuff in your footage. Film at a slightly higher frame rate, slow that footage down, and it's gonna be a lot smoother than it is at normal speed. The next tip is focal length. Don't be afraid to play around with your focal lengths, shoot different focal lengths. Shot like this, for instance, this is on a 24mm lens. You get quite a bit of the background in here, giving you kind of a good shot of a lot of the room that has a certain look to it. But if I were to change this out to, stand by. Now I know this probably sounds like crap because I'm way further away from the lens, but I think this is similar framing for me, and this is at 100mm. You're missing out on a ton of the background. Changing your focal length changes the whole perception of what you got going on in your shots. You can really change things. You can focus your audience's attention on a subject by changing focal length. Wider lenses tend to make people look a little thinner. Longer lenses tend to make people look a little thicker. Thicker, heavier? I don't know. They always say the camera adds 5 pounds. They're probably shooting with a long lens because wide lenses really make you look thin. Get some wide shots. Get some establishing shots of what's going on around you. Then put like a 100mm macro. I love the Canon 100mm macro. That is such a nice lens. Get some really, really in-close detailed shots of what you're doing to give some kind of detail and depth to your shot. Mess around with your focal length, shoot several different focal lengths, and don't shoot everything with one lens. So, next up, movement. You don't have to have movement in every single shot you do. Sometimes a locked off shot is just what the doctor ordered. Movement in a shot adds interest. It kind of can help lead your viewer to where you want them to look. You can zoom or dolly in to a specific spot, which adds movement and kind of centers your focus on what you're zooming or dollying into. It also can kind of lead your viewer through a scene, add some dynamic elements which keeps your viewer interested. Just straight boring locked off shot after locked off shot gets a little boring and tedious. But if you've got some movement in there, coming out from behind, which will be the next tip we're going to talk about, you're coming out from behind something and doing a reveal or something like that, it adds a little suspense, a little drama, keeps your user engaged in what they're watching. So that leads us very nicely into our next tip, which is having foreground and background in your shot.
The next station
Having stuff in the foreground and background to add depth to your shot, it adds a really, really good look. Just a little bit of movement with the camera, or a little bit of movement with your foreground and background, can add a lot of dynamic movement. You get that really cool parallax effect as you move, and it just adds a ton of dynamic interest and kind of depth to your shot, which I know I'm using dynamic and interest a lot, but like we said, this is one very important thing of having B-roll or doing any kind of filmmaking or videos, is keeping your viewers' interest. So the parallax effect is really, really cool looking. I do it a lot even with product shots. I'll have my product kind of far away from the background, so as I'm rotating around the product, the background looks like it's moving rather fast just because of the distance between the two, and it just adds for a really cool effect. Not to mention, stuff in the foreground, you can do the really cool wipe transitions, like this. And the next thing we're going to be talking about is Aperture. Not Aperture lights, even though I'm sure you guys probably thought that's what I was going to say because I talk about them all the time. I do love Aperture lights, but the Aperture on your camera. Most of you probably know the Aperture on your camera should not only be used to control brightness. It is very helpful in a dark situation to have fast glass and really open that aperture up to let a lot of light in. It is also used to creatively kind of shape your shot the way that you want it. So turn that aperture down and get that blurry background. It's gonna put a lot more emphasis on the subject or whatever it is you're trying to focus on. If you've got a cluttered up background or a bunch of crap going on in the back you don't want people to see, you're definitely gonna be able to focus their attention on that and blur all this stuff out. It also just has a really cool and kind of certain look to it. A lot of people just like the way that shallow depth of field looks. It does add a lot of depth and dimension to your shots. But there should be a warning of not to get carried away. Not everything has to be shot at a super low aperture and a super shallow depth of field. You can run into a problem where if you are doing a product shot, you can't see the whole damn product. The part of the product's in focus and part of it's out. Maybe you want to see the whole thing. If you're shooting a person, their nose is in focus and their eyes are out of focus, which is no good. Also, most lenses are not sharpest at their lowest aperture. Usually it's a stop or two up that you're going to get the best kind of tack sharp quality out of a lens that you can get. Definitely use your aperture to your advantage to put the focus on what you want to put it on and add a little interest to your shots, but don't get carried away and shoot everything super shallow and super wide open. This next tip, I am not always the best at following myself. We all kind of get locked into shooting that 120 frames per second because it just looks awesome. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't use 120. 120 looks great. It has a ton of benefits. It smooths out footage, like I mentioned in an earlier tip. It just looks kind of inherently cinematic. It kind of has more weight and drama to it. You can do really cool speed ramps and add interest and kind of add focus to a thing because you can ramp into something and slow down right at an important part to kind of build some drama there. Use 120, but creatively use other frame rates. 24, there's great motion blur. Sometimes you might want to shoot at 60 because the look of 60 kind of gets rid of a lot of that motion blur, and if you play it at full speed, maybe you kind of want that jittery kind of thing in like an action sequence or something. Do some stop motion, add in some time lapses, use different frame rates to tell your story in the way that makes the most sense, and don't get locked into thinking that everything has to be shot in one frame rate. Totally guilty of that. I use 120 a ton. I have to sometimes wean myself. Are you serious right now with the phone call? Two text messages. This is why I have to put my phone on Do Not Disturb when I film. What are you doing? What are you doing? You want some? Oh, you want some screen time? Oh Jesus! Mistakes were made. Good Lord. Whew. Next tip. Hurry. Tip number 10 is shoot more. That's simple. And I don't mean go crazy. We just talked earlier about how planning keeps you from overshooting. Shoot a little more than you think you're gonna need. I've never been mad about having a little more footage than I need. I have been totally screwed sometimes by not having a shot that I did need. If it's an important shot, make sure you get a couple, maybe 2 or 3 of that. In case one of them's a little out of focus, you can't see it in camera because your screen's so small that when you get back and put it on your editing computer, you're like, holy crap, that whole shot's out of focus. That's happened to me several times. Sometimes you get back and you have a plan for your edit, but then you get back and the crap just doesn't work and you need to change directions a little bit. If you have some extra footage, a lot of times you can save that and kind of go off and veer in a different direction. And last bonus tip, have fun. Be creative. Don't stress out about it too much. Try new things. If it doesn't work, who gives a crap? Do it and see. That's how you end up getting some really cool shots sometimes, is you try something completely weird and off the wall and it ends up being super dope. The more you enjoy it, the more creative you're gonna be. If you're all stressed out and too analytical about it, usually those are shooting days I have that go like crap. I have the most fun and the best shoots when I go out and just have a good time and enjoy the process. For someone like me who didn't go to film school for this kind of stuff, I'm always looking for new and better ways to learn more about cinematography and kind of hone my skills and make better videos. I've learned pretty much everything I know through trial and error, getting out there in the field and just trying different things and working at it, watching lots of tutorials, online classes. And today's sponsor, Skillshare, has a lot of great content out there. It's going to help you keep growing those skills and learning new techniques. If you haven't heard of Skillshare, it's basically an online learning community for creators with thousands of really high quality classes ranging from creative and lifestyle to business and technology. With premium membership, you get full and unlimited access to great classes on cinematography, lighting, filmmaking on a budget, a bunch more classes, all taught by experts in the field for far less than $10 a month. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, click the link I'm going to put below this video, and Skillshare is going to give you 2 months of premium access for free. All right, guys, so that wraps up another one. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and maybe you got some good information out of this one. If you did, feel free to smash that like button. That always helps us out. If you're not a subscriber, please consider doing so. We'd love to have you on board. I hope everyone is having a fantastic week, and we will see you in the next video. Man, I'm turning AC on. Hot as hell in here. Can't turn AC on because it makes a humming noise in the mic and I sweat. See what I do for you guys? I sweat.